Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Oregon RIA's new investor series. We are on part 2 tonight. Before you invest, what you need to know. I am Melissa Hartvigsen. I am a local realtor in the Portland metro area. I'm also a house hacker, landlord, investor. And my cohort today is Mr. Chris Watkins, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everybody. I am also an investor. I own a handful of short or long-term rentals. I own one short-term rental, a duplex, in mostly here in Eugene. I do own one in Central Washington as well. And by day, I am a lender, so I help others, both homeowners and investors, work towards their goals of homeownership and help them towards financial freedom.
Thank you, Chris.
So, yeah, Melissa's the one who's moving the slides. I just realized, oh, I've got a cowbell in the other room. I could ding everyone every time I wanted to get the slide to change, but we're going to avoid that for now. So after we talked a lot in our first session about mindset and what it takes to think like an investor, we're going to dive into a few more details about how to get your mindset in the right place to begin investing in this, looking at a few different areas. The first being kind of your credit, which is one of the main things that we as lenders look at when we are gauging your financial ability to purchase a property. Then we're going to talk through a bit of the financing options that are available to you. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the buying process itself. We'll demystify some of that. And then the other steps of what happens after you've got the keys and you close, and whether it's doing construction, whether it's doing property management, we'll talk through some of those things in a little bit more detail as well. But the first one we'll go through is credit. So credit, for when people talk about your credit score, they often think they mean one thing. But credit is actually not, you don't have one credit score. There are a number of different what they call credit algorithms. And the one used for mortgages is called what they call the Fair Isaac Corporation. And we just shorten that to FICO to make it easier to say. And there are three main, what they call bureaus, credit bureaus: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. And these are the three main ones that are capturing data from different agencies and organizations around the country. They're the ones who are bringing that data in-house and then running those algorithms to determine what they feel is your accurate credit score. Now, they're all a little bit different. They all have slightly different takes on what the FICO means, but they're the ones who are, when we as a lending organization, we say we're going to pull your credit, we pull reports from each of these three different credit bureaus. Now, Credit Karma and Vantage and Chase and Bank of America, they all have different ways that they would report your credit score. And they are looking more at a retail credit score, which is, again, a different algorithm. Your FICO score tends to be, for most people, a little bit lower than what you would get from a Credit Karma or your retail credit score. So even if you go purchase a car, you're going to get a little bit different of a number than you would when we pull your credit for a mortgage application. So there is quite a range in credit scores. I mean, it goes from 300 to 850. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody that has a 300. I've seen several people that have close to an 850 credit score. And but Mike, do you pulling your hand up there?
830.
830. Wow. That's solid. I'm at 804, so as long as I stay above 800, I'm pretty happy. We won't make everybody read out their credit scores on the recording, but thank you for offering that, Mike. typically with a mortgage loan application, anything over 800 is considered excellent, and they don't count it beyond that. And mortgages have, for different types of mortgages, have different thresholds for credit scores. So your conventional loan, any sort of conventional loan, the minimum score is a 620. And when we say score, I mentioned that there are 3 different credit bureaus that we take scores from. We take the middle credit score for each person that is on the loan, and we take the lowest middle score. So if you are on there with your partner and you both have your credit run, whoever's middle credit score is lower, that is the one that we'll use for your application. Yes, Mike?
Do they ever average?
Nope.
No.
Lowest
it's-
middle.
Okay.
Yep. So conventional, your lowest can be 620. For an FHA loan, you're 580. A VA loan is also 580, and there are different programs that require higher scores to get you better access to loan to value / down payment. Credit score affects a lot of different things within your mortgage application, so it's a pretty important number. It doesn't just affect your eligibility, but there are tiers to your credit scores effect on that interest rate. That's where it shows up the most, is especially for a conventional loan. There are tiers. Every 20 points of your credit score adds to subtracts a bit from your interest rate. So not just meeting that minimum threshold, but the higher your credit score, the better your interest rate is going to be.
And Chris, is it true that if you're, let's say, a 780 or above, conventional treats them all the same, whether you're 780 or an 805?
800 and above. Yeah. So
Thank you.
Yep. I think that's it for that slide. So it's a very complicated algorithm, and they keep it mostly under wraps, but they do let us in the public know a little bit about what constitutes the different aspects that make up your credit score. So there's 30% of that in the top left is about the accounts that you're owed on, and essentially your debt, your credit utilization. And so this is how much you have on balance compared to how much your credit limit is. So if you have a $10,000 balance and you have a $5,000 or $10,000 balance on a $20,000 credit line, you're 50% utilized. And they look at these across all of your different accounts. So all of your different revolving accounts, credit cards, student loans are a little bit different. Car loans are a little bit different. Your payment history, as you can see, makes up the biggest chunk of this, and your ability to make payments on time. Missed payments get categorized into 30 days late, 60 days late, 90 days late, and they each one of those, and how many times you were behind on a payment gets put onto your credit report, and each of those things affect your credit score negatively. Your credit mix means the different types of credit that are out there. They don't just want to see that you've got 5 different credit cards. They want to see that you have different types. So installment loans like student loans or car loans versus revolving accounts like a credit card. Those are different types of loans that go into your credit mix. Your length of credit history, that's something you kind of have to build up over time. It doesn't just come to you. The longer you keep your accounts open, the better it is for you. So closing accounts, people think, oh, if I just close mine, I finished paying this account off like a credit card. If you close it, that can actually negatively affect your credit score, which is a little bit counterintuitive. And then new credit are what we think of as inquiries to your credit. So when you go apply for a credit card, or you go look at a car payment or a car purchase, anything like that, when somebody pulls your credit, that is considered a new credit inquiry. And if you have a lot of those, then that can negatively affect your credit score as well. So I won't read all of these about how to improve your credit score, but there are lots of resources out there online about how to get your credit up, how to make it work better for you, how to repair credit if something is, you've had either, whether we call it a derogatory account or something that hasn't worked quite well in your credit history. There are lots of different ways to repair it. So you always feel free to reach out to me if you have an interest or if you have a question about what your something that pops up on your credit score. But it is really, really important. I think this is the third to the last one, to check and monitor your credit history. That's something that is underrated. It's not something that people pay attention to as much. It just kind of comes up whenever you want to apply for something. Like, oh, what's my credit score? But making sure that you're monitoring your credit history, or potentially enrolling a service to monitor your credit history, to make sure that things don't slip between the cracks. And this happens. I had somebody who was applying for a mortgage about 2 months ago. And he told me his story that he had a medical bill. It was about $300, and it was sent to his address, but he moved and he got the bill sent to his old address and it never got forwarded. Well, after a little while, that bill went to collections and he didn't find out about it till almost a year later because they didn't have his updated address. And all that time, this was dinging his credit, and his credit score dropped, I think, 70 or 80 points as a result of this $300 medical bill that hadn't been paid in over a year. And while he still qualified for a mortgage, his interest rate went up probably 3/8 of a point, I think, because of that 70-point drop in his credit score. And he ended up paying a couple $100 a month more in his mortgage and mortgage interest because of that one medical bill. That $300 medical bill turned into, thousands of dollars over the course of that mortgage. So it can be a very big deal.
I just want to jump in and add, even if you're not ready to buy in the next 1 to 2 months, I actually encourage all of my clients to meet with their lender and get a financial overview and have their credit checked 6 months to a year before they plan to buy. So if there were any hiccups like the story that Chris just mentioned with the medical bill, you have time to deal with it and have your score rebound before you actually make your purchase.
Yeah, by the time you're getting to a mortgage application and you've got a house that you were really excited about, that's not the time you want to find out that you have something from your history that's going to jump up and be a problem. So then we'll jump into the financing side of it. So since most folks here are in the earlier parts of their career investing, we won't talk too much about commercial lending, but we will give kind of a high level overview of some of the different loan types that are available to you as an investor. Now, the one that most people think about when we think about a mortgage is what we call a conventional loan. And conventional lenders are not directly backed by the government, but backed by what we call government-sponsored entities. These are Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are the two government-sponsored entities that essentially, if you underwrite to their standards, they don't back it directly, but they will essentially guarantee the loans that they're able to be sold on a secondary market. And so most loans that go out today are conventional loans. Now, conventional loans have limits that you can only go up so high. I believe it's still $766,000 is what we call the conforming loan limit. Once you get above that amount, and this is for a single family residence, once you get above that number, you're in the territory of what we call jumbo loans. And those have a little bit tighter credit requirements. The appraisals are a little bit different. When you go up above that $766,000 loan limit, not purchase price, but the loan limit. We'll get into other types of loans in a little bit, but there are also lots of loan types that are not guaranteed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They're not underwritten to those guidelines, and they have a little bit different market, and they're a little bit more flexible for people whose job history or their credit or other things aren't quite as cut and dry as most. We'll get into what are called non-QM loans. Then you have the kind of trio of explicitly government-backed loans, FHA, which is the Fair Housing Act, the USDA, which serves more rural communities, and the VA, which serves veterans and service members. Those each have their own, very lengthy criteria. The FHA loan is the one that most people will have experience with. And again, unless you're in rural areas or unless you're a veteran, you're not going to be really brushing up against those. But the FHA is meant to increase home ownership for just about everybody across the country, and so they are really helpful in. They have a little bit more lax credit limits. They require different. Their credit situation is a little bit different. They're a little bit more forgiving. They tend to have lower interest rates, but on the flip side, they do have mortgage insurance that is more expensive, and they do have some limitations. But an FHA loan is often a great way to get into your first property. Let's go to the next one. Commercial loans. Like I mentioned, we're not going to dive too much into commercial here because it's not where most people are at. I will mention just a few things. So residential loans typically are 15 to 30-year loans. They're usually fixed interest rates. And you can have loan to values, which means how much you're borrowing versus how much the house is worth of 80, 60, anywhere up to 80 or even 95 or 97% of the value of the property you can borrow against. Commercial loans are very different. You have to sign a business arrangement. You have typically shorter terms. That means they're 2 to 10 years long, with a shorter amortization period. They're typically variable rate. Typically much lower loan to values, usually in the 50 to 60% range, and they can have prepayment penalties where conventional loans are not allowed to have prepayment penalties. So we won't dive too much into that. I'm not a commercial lender. I know a little bit about it, but I don't want to get give you information that would steer you in the wrong direction. So the other loans are where a lot of investors tend to spend most of their time. DSCR stands for Debt Service Coverage Ratio. And that essentially means how much income does a property bring in versus how much the loan is. And a DSCR of 1 means that, and this is on your monthly payment versus how much income the property brings in. So as an investor, you hopefully want to have a rental property that is bringing in more money than you would need to be spending on the loan, including your property taxes, insurance, etc. So anything over 1 means that you are bringing in more money than you are spending on a monthly basis. If it's less than 1, that's the opposite. You're spending more on that loan than you're receiving from the property. DSCR loans are you can't live in a DSCR loan property. They're not for primary residences, whereas lots of the government loans require that you are a primary resident. DSCR, you cannot live in them. They are meant for investment properties just like this. They are a lot more flexible. They only care about your credit score. They don't care about your income. They don't care about a lot of other aspects that we typically see in your conventional loan process. They only care about the property itself and the property's ability to pay off the loan. So they're easier loans to underwrite. They go more smoothly. They do offer a little bit higher interest rate than your standard conventional loans, but they're a great option for a lot of investors. Private money is another big area for investors, and especially those just getting started. Mike here has a lot of experience in private lending. Private lending essentially just means somebody who is willing to loan you money. It can be an organization or it can be an individual person. Can be your Uncle Larry who, drives a Corvette and, hit big on the slots that one time and now wears fancy clothes. That can be private money. It can be family, it can be friends, people that you know. This is often where a lot of investors start raising money to buy properties, is by tapping into their networks around them, seeing who has a little bit of money they would like to earn some interest on. Next is the non-QM, and that's what I was talking about earlier, where these are loans that fall outside of the government-backed entity's purview, and they can be a little bit more flexible with your income, with your job situation, whether you have a business or not. There are a lot of different types that get dropped into this non-QM bucket, but it's essentially ways to make it easier for different types of borrowers who don't fit into the conventional or FHA loan molds. Yes, Mike.
Wouldn't non-QM be a DSCR?
Not exclusive.
Yeah, not exclusively. A DSCR would be a version of non-QM, but we broke it out specifically because it is a very popular loan type. Hard money is very similar to private money, but a hard money lender is typically an organization that raises a fund of money, a pool of money, usually from high net worth individuals, and then they go out and they lend that money to investors. They are typically very high interest rate. So the rate that I usually get from my hard money lender is about 12%. So it is very high compared to other loan options, but they are very flexible. They cater to investors. They don't care nearly as much about the property itself. The property could be, have had a fire go through it or be fallen down. They just want to understand that you have a plan to make this property habitable and profitable again. And so a lot of house flippers will use hard money lenders to get into a property very quickly. They can close in as little as 7 days. They are more expensive to originate. They're more expensive on a month-to-month basis. So you only want to have them as long as you absolutely need them, but they are a pretty essential tool for people who are looking to buy houses more quickly than they can with just a conventional loan.
Say another good thing hard money is for is a house that doesn't really qualify for a traditional rehab loan on a conventional. And this gets it in a condition where you can refinance to get to a more traditional loan.
Yes, they don't have the same requirements that conventional and government-backed loans do as far as the habitability of the property. So now we want to break down a little bit I'm having trouble seeing the bottom of that screen. Okay, got it now. We just want to break down the difference between some of these different loan types when you think of being an owner occupant or primary mortgage versus an investor. And an owner occupant, could be just you purchasing your own house to live in, but it can also be purchasing a 2, 3, or 4 unit property and living in one unit, as Riley and Zach are doing on theirs. They have a lot of experience over the last couple of months with this, but you can purchase a 2, 3, or 4 unit property, live in one of those units, and that would be considered an owner occupied property. So for VA lenders or VA borrowers, you don't have to put any money down. The government backs. There are caveats to that, but the government will back up 100% of the loan of the purchase price. For FHA loans, the minimum is 3.5%, and that is the same across all unit mixes. For conventional lenders, you can go as little as 3% with your first unit, but if you're buying any sort of multifamily, it's got to be at least 5%. And there are differences between the FHA and conventional, but there are different times when a conventional is more useful for multifamily property than an FHA and vice versa. Now, off to the right, you see the investor minimum down payments of 20 to 25%. So just right off the bat, and with our next, no, the next slide, but you'll see a little bit more detail what that can mean for how much cash you need to bring to a deal to get into it as an owner occupant versus an investor. So let's go. So there are a lot of costs that are associated with closing a loan. We'll dive into some of those. One that most people don't realize when they're getting into it, they think of closing costs, but almost every lender will require that you have some money outside of this deal, that this property isn't taking up all of the money that you have. You need to have some form of reserves. And as you can see on the screen here, that's different for different unit mixes. It's different for different loan types. And we'll talk a little bit, Melissa and I will talk a little bit more about what it means to have reserves for an investment property, planning ahead for that. But when it comes to qualifying for a loan, different loan types will have different requirements that you show that you have enough cash in the bank after closing to cover anything. Yes, Mike.
Can a HELOC be a reserve?
It depends on the loan type. Non-QM loans, typically yes. FHA, typically no. Conventional, yeah, it depends. Sometimes if you're getting cash out and a cash out refinance, that can be used as reserves as well. So this is one where you can, it gets a little bit into the weeds really quickly.
Yeah,
So I just
yeah.
wanted to at least bring up the general topic that having reserves is very important. And again,
Yeah.
we'll dive into that a little bit further down the road, or further down the deck, as it were. So going back to that grid that we saw before, FHA, VA, conventional, and investor. So if you're buying a $500,000 property, to be, for a VA loan, you don't have to bring any down payment. I've done a few of these loans where people essentially walk away, bring, maybe $10 or $20 to the deal when it's all over. Those don't happen very often. They require some seller credits, but it happens. For FHA, you need to be 3.5%. For conventional, you'd have to bring 3%, and this is for a single family residence, not a duplex or a multifamily. As an investor, no, you got to bring 100 large to the deal just for a down payment. So immediately that puts a pretty high barrier to investing in a property that you don't live in. Closing costs are, for VA, you have some exemptions. For other loans, they're fairly similar. Extra costs, which you can be reserves or other types of prepaid expenses. So that bottom row shows you a bit of a difference of what it means to come to the closing table for each of these different types of loans. And these can each be kind of summed up in the point that house hacking, in the way that we described in our first session, is the easiest, lowest barrier to entry to get into real estate investing, is to buy some sort of investment property that you also live in or plan to flip slowly over a year, and take advantage of the government backing your loan and not having to put nearly as much cash into the deal.
It's a lot easier to do, 35K 3 or 4 times over a period of 5 years than it is to wait until you have 120 up front.
Absolutely. So there are a handful of other things outside of that on top of your down payment that you're going to need to think about. Closing costs can typically, what we call closing costs and prepaids, are two things that come into the closing table. And they typically are, let's say, between 2 and 3%, depending on the loan type. Closing costs includes all the title work, the loan origination, underwriting, loan processing, lots of various fees that you never really think about. The prepaids are your property taxes, Often it'll be your homeowner's insurance, mortgage insurance. Other prepaids are things that you would essentially be paying out already, but they get prorated into the closing. And you have to pay them upfront at the closing table. There are other items that you're going to pay for outside of the loan itself. So the first one is your home inspection, and those can range from 500 to 800 to 1,000, depending on the size of the property, whether it's single family or multifamily. But that's something that you, as the buyer, pay up front. And then an appraisal is another fee that you have during the closing process, during the escrow process, and that's something that you pay up front as well. Credit reporting is another one that can be paid up front or rolled into the loan closing. The reserves we already touched on a little bit, so we won't belabor that point too much, but those can be things that your lender will make you show that you have evidence of in the bank account somewhere. So we'll turn it over to Melissa to talk a little bit more about the fun part.
The fun part. Well, I personally think math is fun. So, Chris, no shade to you. We love that. And if we're coming at a property from an investment mindset, I just want to remind you, it's not about the warm and fuzzy feeling anyway. It's great that you're going to get the keys, but we're still going to do the math first. So we're going to cover different stages and milestone and the team that's going to get you ultimately through the process. So in our first stage, this is actually Mr. Watkins. Chris is going to be in charge of doing your pre-approval for you. And I do want to point out that there is a big difference between a pre-approval and a pre-qualification. Some lenders do what's called a pre-qualification, where they talk to you on the phone. They're like, okay, how much money do you make? And you have okay credit. Cool, you're approved for X dollars. What Chris does is a formal pre-approval where he looks at all of your assets and all of your credit and establishes a debt ratio, and then tells you, okay, you can actually buy a house for this, and this is actually your payment. So when we're talking to you in our investor classes, we're only concerned with pre-approvals. The pre-qualification means nothing.
Nope.
So we're going to learn what you qualify for. On the real estate side, having this pre-approval letter, for me, improves our bargaining power with the seller. Chris quite frequently does such a thorough job that it's like your file is pre-underwritten or already checked by the people who are going to compare the balances against all the rules for approving your loan. So we know that your loan isn't going to fail. And that's why we're saying this is a bargaining tool with the seller. Because not every bank that you go to or lender who's going to give you a mortgage does the same due diligence. And among my real estate professionals, there's a reputation, and we kind of know which lenders are giving the pre-approvals versus a pre-qualification. So if we're competing in multiple offers, we love pre-approvals.
Yeah, and I think that it is a protection for you as a buyer as much as it is anything else, because we want to make sure that we can deliver on what we promise up front. If we say we are going to be able to get you this loan, then unless something crazy comes up during the escrow process and underwriting, we're going to be able to close that loan. And so we don't want you to get 3-4 weeks into this negotiation, get into the underwriting process, realize you can't do the loan, and be out any sort of earnest money deposit that you put in. So it's a protection for everybody to make sure that we know that you can perform on what we say you can perform on.
Yeah, and this is just a really good process to get to know your lender. They're going to explain the loan product and how that all relates to you and how it helps you move forward. So stage 2 is the real estate search. I always advise my clients to just create a checklist. You should be very mindful about what's on here. It's not about, I need it to face this way and it should have this kind of plants in the yard. It should be meeting your investment criteria. There's an expected return, or there's an opportunity for you to add value because the house is a little bit dated and looks like 1970 inside. That might be an example of criteria. You're also going to, because you already started with your pre-approval, set your budget. and stick to it. We don't want to set you up for failure by having you spend more money, because then it just doesn't make sense as an investment. This isn't some emotional thing for you to get caught up in and overspend. The idea is, if you're gonna burr the property, that after you do your renovations and have it rented, you're cash flowing and you can pull money out. You're just a regular landlord, that you are putting money in your bank account every month and not actually paying the bank for your tenants to live there. Remember, always run the numbers first. We never just go look at a property on a whim for an investment. We always make sure the math works.
And that's something that Melissa and I can help you in running those numbers before you even go out to see something. So that's an important part of the service.
Yeah, so stage 3, we actually get your accepted offer. And these aren't necessarily linear timelines. A lot of things happen at the same time, but in a residential loan situation, a conventional loan can close anywhere from 20 days to 30 days is typical. The USDA, VA, and FHA loans tend to need up to 45 days. There's a little bit more detailed work on the processing, and the appraisers are a little slower to schedule on those. We generally like to see a little bit more time. So that's from contract offer accepted all the way to the day you get keys. Commercial loans, there's quite a bit more due diligence on the loan side, and also potentially on the actual property side. If you're talking about a 300-unit complex, there's a lot more leases to go through and financials to evaluate. Mike's nodding. And then when we look at some of these non-QM products, like a hard money loan, they can close as little as 7 days. So in my world, when we get an accepted offer, the first thing that occurs is a bunch of timelines trigger all at once. So for you, buying conventional FHA, VA, USDA, all of those loans, the first few days, if you have tenants occupying the property, you get an interior unit inspection. Then we're also going to get your title report, property disclosures, HOA documents, if they are applicable, and then you'll have 5 business days to review those. Also on day 1, your 10 business day home inspection period starts, and your financing contingency. So prepare for, I'd say, at least feeling like you have a part-time job, if not a second job, for about the first week to 10 days. Because while I'm working through all of those things with you, Chris is going to be working on getting your financing contingency done. So approval is going to happen somewhere in the middle of this process, around day 14, if we're doing a 30-day transaction. But on day 1, when I send Chris the contract because we have an offer, he's going to hit you with his, I don't know, was it 70 or 100-page loan disclosures, and reconfirm everything that you've already sent him again to make sure it's a clean file so it can move through the process. And then we'll have other hurdles that come up during the contract that we might write in. Like if there's a tenant that's supposed to move out, maybe we require proof that they're actually gone before we move to closing, for example. Residential loan milestones, maybe Chris, I'll let you jump back in on this one.
Yeah, sure. So, when we receive the contract from Melissa, we go through and make sure that all the dots are crossed and the T's T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and that we have all the right information. Then we're going to jump back in and we're going to look back at your pre-approval, and we're going to look back at your loan file and make sure, okay, we're going to put together lists of the documents that we're going to need to include in your underwriting file. We will send you, as Melissa mentioned, a 70 to 100 page loan disclosure package. Thankfully now those are all DocuSign, so they're all electronic. You don't have to flip through 100 pieces of paper, and most of them are boilerplate required by the federal government. A handful of ones are actually really important, like the loan estimate, which will give you a breakdown of all your expected costs and the money that you're going to need to produce to close. We also, once your inspection period is over, once you've approved your inspection, we will order the appraisal. We'll get our appraiser out there within a few days to give us an idea of what they feel that the property is worth. And then kind of concurrent to that, we are sending the file and all the updated documents that we've collected from you to the underwriters. They turn around, they review them usually within a day or two, and they come back and say, okay, here are the things that we're going to need to see. Here are the documents that we need to see. Often it's bank statements or verification of your income, those kind of things that we call conditions. So we pull those together, we resubmit those to the underwriters. They come through and they give us the final, what we call clear to close. And this can be anywhere from 3 to 4 days to 2 weeks before closing, depending on how clean your file is. And we send you the final breakdown of the numbers so you can see exactly how much you are going to need to bring to the closing table. You're connected with the escrow company or the title company, and they tell you, okay, we need you to wire, this X amount of money to us at these, and those wiring instructions are very important to get right. And then once they have the money in hand, then we set up a time for you to go and actually sign. And every time right now, almost all of these are still in person, local at the title company or escrow company. We're getting more towards getting packages that we can partially sign digitally, but most of the time these are still paper documents that require a wet signature in your hand to cramp up after a half hour of signing documents. And then stage 4 is closing. So once you've signed all those documents, then we can release the money. The lender can release the money to the seller, and then the title company will record the documents with the county, and everything is recorded. And then you can pick up your keys from usually the real estate agent. Sometimes it's Melissa, sometimes it's the escrow company, depends on the sale. But that gets you to the point where you actually own this property. It is yours now.
Hooray!
Yes. Now the real fun begins.
So meet the team. We've got a realtor navigating with you through the transaction to help you with all those important contract related milestones. We've got your lender, like Chris, helping you out with all the financial aspects of this and making sure that your home gets taken care of. The home inspector is actually a neutral third party of the buyer's choosing. The appraiser is a neutral third party that nobody gets to choose. Chris gets to use something called the Appraisal Management Company, or AMC for short. He sends them the money for your appraisal, and then one of the appraiser picks it up. And this prevents us from influencing them on what the property value is.
Yeah.
After closing, you may need a property manager if you're going to hold the property as a rental. You'll definitely need some good contractors to help you through. So I am a realtor, More Realty. I've been licensed since 2017, and my favorite clients to help are my investor clients. It's really rewarding for me to see people do what I'm doing, do what Chris is doing, and set themselves up. So if you have somebody you need to bounce ideas off and really get you going, I love mentoring people for this stuff. And I think our next partner on the team, Chris, can take it from here.
Yeah, and as I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm also an investor, and I love working with investors. I love helping people craft a portfolio, thinking about the different steps, the different stages in building that, working towards goals that they have for their own version of financial freedom, figuring out their skill sets, seeing how we can best apply that, because real estate is such a vast field and there's so many different niches and ways that you can apply your own skill set and tackle real estate that can be very profitable. And so I love working with folks who are really excited about that. I love diving into numbers, diving into projects. I've renovated lots of houses myself. I love diving into the job site as well. So I've seen for real estate from most of the different angles that you can see real estate. And so I love being able to share that perspective with clients and friends and fellow investors.
And that-
During the transaction, sorry, let's
I was
say
gonna
say
say-
something.
Yeah, I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say, once you get through the transaction, it's not like Chris and I are gonna disappear. We're gonna help you with the rest of this stuff. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, no, that's very true. She already mentioned the inspector and the appraiser. The inspector is somebody that you are hiring. They work for you. They report directly to you. The appraiser is somebody who reports directly to the lender. And so you may not even interact with an appraiser at all. And that's almost by design. They don't want to be interfered with. And there are a lot of laws about how you interact with an appraiser. So the title and escrow officer is somebody that you will work with. They're going to be the ones who are working on the title behind the scenes while the underwriting is going on. And we won't get into the nuances of title, but it is a very important aspect of the transaction between buyer and seller. And they are the one typically whose office you are going to go to at the end to sign all of the papers. So they're typically one of the few folks that you are going to be meeting in person throughout this process. Then afterward, as Melissa mentioned, whether you are living in the property yourself, you don't typically need a property manager at that point. But if you are going to be strictly using it as an investment property, you can either self-manage or hire a company to tackle that part of the aspect of ownership for you. And the contractor is the other party that could potentially, maybe you are going to be the contractor if you have the skill set to do so, or you're going to be managing a contractor to tackle some of the work that needs to be done. And Melissa has lots of experience in property management, and she's going to share a little bit more about that in the next section.
Okay, well, welcome to Ownership and Beyond. Now you're a landlord and we've got maintenance to take care of. I'm hearing some chuckling. I love that because landlording, I'll just tell a quick story. One of my clients who's in the class has a difficult tenant that we're learning how to navigate, and they have a dog that they don't pick up afterwards. And I kind of chuckled to myself because they thought they'd never be sending me those kind of pictures. So landlording will give you lots of surprises is the moral of that story. So if you're going to self-manage, Oregon landlord tenant law, the ORS chapter 90 is the gold standard of what you need to know managing tenants. So I would bookmark that page on the ORS, refer back to it. Even if you have verbal agreements with your tenants, there are still things that apply on both sides, like habitability, etc. So that is key to know it. It's also good bedtime reading if you're having a hard time going to bed. I would also say join the local RIA. So congratulations to all of you who are already here, or the Rental Housing Alliance, which specifically focuses on rental housing units and not other aspects of real estate investing. You should only purchase the best leasing forms. I've had a lot of people over the years who've used forms that they purchased from Zillow or used the free ones on BiggerPockets. But I'm here to tell you, because Oregon is one of the most heavily legislated against landlords in the country, you cannot use those. They are not up to date. They're not compliant. And even if they tell you an attorney wrote them, we change our landlord tenant law on an emergency basis. It used to be every 2 years, and we've had emergency meetings since 2019, anywhere from 6 to 10 times a year to change our rules. So please buy forms from a local rental housing alliance through Tenant Tech or one of the other state approved forms companies. Track your expenses, collect rent, maintain the property, and use the golden rule when you're interacting with your tenants. For those of you who want to hire a property manager, get recommendations. And when I say get recommendations, please don't just go on Google and look for reviews. I would say actually talk to people you know who are hiring a property manager. And if you're going to get somebody from Google, because you can't find anybody else to give you a recommendation, ask for references and call them. read the contract carefully and negotiate on terms. It's quite common for property managers to have a range of percentages. In the Portland metro market, 8 to 10% is customary. I've seen people charge a half a month's rent for leasing a unit to fill a vacancy. I've also seen others charge a full month's rent. Some of them include unit inspections. Some of them charge separately for it. So the bottom line is it's hard to compare apples to apples with those things. And somebody who on face value looks like they're the cheapest because they have the lowest percent might nickel and dime you with a whole bunch of fees. Every time they have to give a notice to your tenant, every time they do a lease renewal for you, every time you pick up the phone to review your financial statement with them. Maybe they charge you 75 bucks an hour, or maybe they charge you 100 bucks an hour. So look at the fine print on the contract, and you should be monitoring your property manager's performance. I wouldn't just sit it on autopilot, collect my checks, and never visit my property. I would personally ask my property manager to allow me to accompany at least one of those inspections per year. I actually have a handout for everybody, maybe overkill, but my interview for property manager almost 5 pages long. And that's going to be a handout that we're going to email to everybody tomorrow along with the video recording. And then maintenance. This is the really fun part of being a landlord. But you least expect it, something's going to break and it's going to need your attention. So if you're new to investing and you've never done this before, when I'm talking about reserves for maintenance, this is different than the reserves we were talking about earlier to qualify for your loan. So you can, on a single family home, set aside $25,000 for big ticket items. That covers roof when it needs to be replaced, repainting the exterior, replacing HVAC system, all the big ticket stuff. Or you can create a reserve account and set aside maybe 1% of your purchase price annually until you reach that 25%. There are economies of scale in play. So if you have a 4-unit property, you don't need a reserve fund of 100K, but maybe you bump that up to 35 or 40,000. And that way you're not charging up a credit card when you need to replace the siding. You actually have the money set aside and available. It's better to operate that way. I personally believe in paying for things instead of financing repairs. And doing this has helped me maintain profitability at all of my rentals. So these are my personal tips. You should inspect your units 1 to 2 times a year, inside and outside. Even if your tenants pay their rent on time, that does not mean they're taking care of your house. And sometimes they just don't notice stuff and don't report it to you. Prune back your landscaping, even if it's your tenant's responsibility in the rental agreement, you want to keep that curb appeal. So pay the landscaper to go out there and bill it back to the tenant if they're not following the rental agreement. In the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of rain and roofs will destroy the rest of the house if they're not properly maintained. So treat annually for moss, clean your gutters. And if you're in a heavily treed area, you should clean multiple times a year and check the inside for leaks. Every interior inspection, you should be testing the smoke alarms and making sure your HVAC system works.
I will add that one thing that I talk about with each of my tenants as they go in is that I want to be the first one that they call if there's a problem. I want to be the person I want to know even before there is a problem. If something looks funny or if something's not quite working right, I don't care if it seems kind of small or nickel and diming. If they feel like they're bothering me, I want to be the one that knows because I'm the one that knows how the house works. And I want to be able to maintain and find a problem before it becomes a problem.
That's a very good point. I have similar conversations with all my tenants. When my tenants move in, I have a welcome email that they get and a welcome basket. And in the welcome email, it's a reminder on how to contact me about maintenance, how to contact me after hours, what's the best way to request things. And in my welcome basket, as a gesture of goodwill, I usually give them, depending on the rent amount, $50 to $100 gift card of a local restaurant or Whole Foods. If It's a little nice thing on the front end, just really builds that rapport so they will come to you when you have issues. And then I include things like stainless steel cleaner for the appliances and the hardwood floor cleaner that I would prefer that they use to help encourage them to maintain my house. And I always tell them, hey, look, I'm a partner here. This is my retirement income, and I want to take care of this place, both to make sure that I'm doing well in my retirement, but so that you're happy and stay here for a long time. Can we agree that you're going to call me when any tiny little thing comes up? And for the most part, that's worked really well to get my tenants to report things to me. So shall we talk about some surprise fun things that happen? It sounds like
Sure.
Mike might have a story. So after Chris goes, we'll see what Mike has to say.
Oh, let's see. The one that's the most recent chapter in the maintenance saga. So I have a duplex here in Eugene. The upper unit is a long-term rental, the lower unit is a short-term rental. And I renovated the inside of that unit very extensively, but the fridge that came with the house was pretty new, and so I didn't feel the need to replace it with a brand new refrigerator until I had some guests that had come in from across the country for a football game, and they were very excited to be in town. They came, dropped their stuff off in the room, and then went out to dinner. This is on a Friday evening, and then when they came back, one of the tenants or one of the guests opened up the refrigerator, and it looked like The Shining, and the elevator scene in The Shining, when a pump or something, a hose had broken inside the refrigerator and it had filled up with water. And when they went to open the door, the whole thing just unloaded all of the water across the kitchen floor, dining room floor, everywhere. And they called me as I was making dinner for my family and said, we have a big problem. And so instead of spending the weekend relaxing with family, we spent it, we hauled out the refrigerator that night. We brought them a cooler full of ice and a 6-pack of beer for their trouble. And we went and bought a fridge and brought one to them the next day and installed it. And that was a fun weekend last fall. Let somebody else go.
I feel like Mike has one.
I bought the duplex at the end of my block, and I got a couple of 20-something tech guys on one side, and real nice guys. Actually, one of these guys, their father is a rental owner, but he didn't have a property at the time, so they came into my place. So I tell all my tenants, you are my eyes on the property. I am one of those weird landlords where I want everything taken care of. I want you absolutely happy. I will make everything perfect. That's my standard. So they called me up and he said, I think the chain in the toilet broke. Okay, go to Home Depot, get a chain thing. I come over there to replace the chain in the toilet. And I come in the house, and this is back when we had the heat wave. I look at the thermostat, it was 90 degrees in the house, and it's running. I said, whoa, I'll take care of this chain, but what's the scoop? Oh, well, we didn't want to call you, but yeah, it seemed a little warm in here. Oh my, I'm standing there. I get my HVAC guy on the phone, and that's the greatest thing. When you're landlording, you got to have a good HVAC guy, electrician, plumber, etc. I got them all. So I called my HVAC guy. They got over there, and some kind of compressor chamber, something, I don't know. But part of it was the unit would run, no cooling. So I immediately jumped on this, but I told my tenants, again, you are my eyes and ears on the property. I mean, it's like, it's 90 degrees in here. Yes, I'll take care of the toilet chain, but come on. I mean, so that was just recently. It's like top of mind story. Oh, but the other side of the duplex, just a couple days ago, it's at the end of my block. I drive down and I see one of those vents in the screen on the side window. Like they're and so I call them up, and real nice kid, a nice couple. And I say, hey, by the way, remind me, does your side have central or, oh yeah, it's got some, but back when we had the heat wave, it kind of got up to like 79 in here. So we put, oh, I said, you're my eyes and ears on the property. Why did you put that in? Literally, I'm calling my HVAC guy. He's gonna get over it. Whatever needs to be done, it's gonna be done. But it really takes some education to tell the tenants, and you have to be. I am of the attitude, I don't care whatever that my property needs. I have high-end properties. All my rents are over $1,000 or more a month, and or no, over 2,000 a month. And so I got nice properties. I take care of them, and I want my tenants to tell me, I don't care if I get 3 calls a day, whatever needs done, I'll take care of it. So that's my story.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
So I have countless stories on holidays, and there was 3 days before Thanksgiving, my tenants called and said the stove was working. And this is actually very similar to Chris's story. I bought the property. It was like a 3-year-old stove. It worked fine for the year that I lived there, moved out. It's not working. So called my appliance guy, got him out there the same day. He calls me back an hour later. He said, great news. It's a $300 part and I can get it for you, but it's 3 weeks away. And my lovely tenants had their family in town and they planned to make Thanksgiving dinner. And I said, oh, $300, that's halfway to a new stove. I don't know if I feel good about them not having an ability to cook for Thanksgiving. I mean, this is a habitability issue, 1, and 2, that just feels really terrible for their family. I don't want them going to Chinese food. This is just not going to happen. So my husband and I went to Lowe's the next day, got a U-Haul, drove the stove over there, put it in. 2 years ago for 4th of July, I was visiting family in California and was about to board the plane the day after 4th of July. My tenant calls, he said, just so you know, I called the fire department. The fence is on fire because the neighbor let off fireworks and it was smoldering in the bark dust and it caught the neighbor's tree. Like, I have an attached townhouse, so 5 people lost their fences. My one neighbor's back of her house that was so hot, her windows shattered. And I was so glad my tenants called me and they're like, oh, we feel so bad. We're calling you. You're at the airport. And I was like, no. I'm going to call my guy. My insurance guy's going to be there first thing in the morning. I'm going to come back as soon as I get off the plane. We're going to come take care of you. We'll get it figured out. And the insurance company was dragging their feet for the people who had the most damage. And I said, you know what? My poor tenants can't go in the backyard because they don't have any privacy and they can't let their dog out. So I just called my contractor and got him to do the fence. And I told the neighbors when their insurance figures it out, they can get back to me. It wasn't worth my time to deal with it and wait. I didn't want them to be a month or 2 months without having any privacy or being able to let their dog out in the yard. So it's never a convenient time when this stuff happens, but we have a responsibility to take care of the people who are living in our assets.
Yeah.
Side note, I got a real good fence guy.
Oh, good. Does he work in Beaverton?
And where?
I live in Beaverton, Mike.
Oh.
Y'all are down in Eugene. If I buy one down there, I'll call you though.
Yeah. All right. So that is the end of our slide deck, but we wanted to leave some time for questions specifically. Questions, if you have a really good story about a house maintenance issue, maybe we can entertain 1 or 2 of those, but we wanted to make sure that we are providing as much value as we can for you all. So we wanted to open up the floor to talk about anything that we've kind of covered tonight, maybe a handful of things we haven't covered, but turn the floor over a little bit and let you guys ask some questions if you have any. And if you don't, that's all right too. We will not make you have one.
Mike.
I wrote my question down. A couple real just quickly. Boom, boom, boom. HOAs. Do you see them more increasing, or is that like an old school thing or what? I mean,
That's
mean,
gonna that's gonna increase. So builders are getting a huge discount by turning everything into an HOA. All of the new construction developments, even if you have a detached single family home, come with an HOA. So they get to
Yeah.
skip paying some money for road maintenance and things like that by passing that on to the homeowner. So it will continue to grow.
Yep.
HOAs are growing in popularity.
Yep.
And who
Because
benefits?
it's cheap for the builder, Mike.
Cheaper
Yeah.
for, okay, because I mean, it's a bunch of Karens, come on, okay.
Yeah.
The appraisers, I assume, but I'd like to know from experts. Appraisers are under some very serious rules, regulations, everything else, because they are setting a price point and everything else. And
Mhm.
they're highly regulated and especially when the way you illustrate it's kind of a one-off. I don't go near them and everything else, but the rules and regulations for appraisers, very strong. Yes, no.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Forms. I get all my forms out of ROA, Rental Owners Association of Lane County, because they are
Mhm.
written for state of Oregon. Good?
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay.
And in Eugene, you guys have some unique rental rules that other cities don't have. So that's why I recommended your local rental housing alliance, whoever is local to you, because the rules in Eugene are different than Portland, and the rules in Portland are different than Milwaukee, and so on. So great job, Mike.
Awesome. Okay, well then you covered my notes. Thank you. You guys are excellent. Thank you.
I want to jump back on the appraisal thing for just a minute. So an appraisal is technically an opinion of value. There is subjectivity to that. So the appraisers have some guidelines they're supposed to follow from the bank. And sometimes they don't always follow their own guidelines. So if we wrote an offer for you on a property and the appraiser thought it was worth less than your offer amount, we can do something called an appraisal rebuttal, where me as the realtor, Chris doesn't get involved in this part. He can give me the contact information in the form, but then I can go and find comps that maybe they should have used. So an example was at a client that had a 15,000 foot lot and it had a detached garage and it was like a 1,300 square foot house. And the appraiser only pulled comps that had lot sizes less than 7,000 feet.
Oh,
And most of the comps also didn't have a garage. So on the rebuttal form, I said, hey, you didn't actually account for this additional value in land. You didn't account for the value in the structure. Here are other sales that have more similar to the house that this client is buying. And then they adjusted the value based on the new comps that I provided.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've had success on the other side using appraisers when either selling or having a house refinanced as the owner, not as me as a lender, but me as an owner, an investor. When you do your work, when you do their job for them, they tend to reward you. And what I mean by that is if you go ahead of them and you pull favorable comps, if you pull comps that are close to what you have and support the value that you think the property has, and I've left a packet with, a thank you packet for the appraiser that had my own comp opinion, my own list of comps and a few other bits of information about the house, all the permits that I had pulled, all the construction costs, things like that. And I leave that in a packet for the appraiser. And it does a little bit of their job for them. And they, like I said, they tend to appraise things a little bit more highly when they're taking those things into account.
that is a slick hack. I love it.
Yeah.
Some of them do. Some of them will get very angry
Yeah.
if you do that.
I got a kind of a related question. If I'm just I'm kind of mentally going through various routes here so we own a home here in Minneapolis. And if I'm just trying to get a quick idea for the value or the equity that we've got in it, have you guys, when you've had appraisals happen, do you ever compare those to say what Zillow says your house is, like how far off in your experience is that number?
So Alex, I'm gonna put a caveat. I don't know your market, but in Oregon, I've seen them be off by as much as 20%. When I provide a competitive market analysis, I use similar parameters to what an appraiser would.
Mhm.
And I'm generally accurate within a 5% or less range. Most of the time on my offers on houses, I'm spot on my CMAs. I'm pretty accurate with that. So I might suggest that you reach out to the realtor that sold you their house. They're going to love an opportunity to stay in touch with you anyway and say, hey, you know what? Before I pay for an appraisal, I would love it if you could do a new CMA for me. I'd like to know if I could drop my PMI, and then you can reach out to your lender.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
I'm pretty
don't-
sure if we want to have another class on running comps, I can teach you guys some tricks on how to do that. It will be better than the Zestimate within like a half an hour.
Yeah, it's an underrated skill for sure.
Any other
Um,
questions on that line, Alex?
I was thinking about the last video, and I'm just learning about the HELOC loans.
Mhm.
So my wife and I are kind of in a spot where we're trying to figure out, what are the worthwhile investments we want to put into this house. We've had many conversations about retaining this house, but having this be a rental, and then house hopping to a different
Mhm.
spot. We happen to be on a fairly busy corner. That so we've been here since 2019, like the beginning of the year, 2019. So we've got a great interest rate, but the busy corner has been a bigger deal than we ever thought it was going to be, for us, just and where we're living. And so we would love to have this be kind of a nice rental house. It's a great location. Anyway, so we've been having a lot of conversations. We've been going around and around in circles about, like, how can we be targeted in what we're investing in? How do we, and so this HELOC situation, which I was not aware of previously, I think could be a key for us. So I was, as we were talking, I was jotting down all the things that I think, I should take care of ahead of time, and estimating how much I think it's going to cost. And
So
thinking
I
about-
think this is a great time for you to involve some professionals and help you. Even if you're not ready right now, we can help you structure a plan. And I get it that I don't know your market, but
Yeah.
I'm willing to schedule a phone call with you. We can talk through some things to help you find a realtor in your market who can help you navigate that. Couple of the guys on here I know found me on Bigger Pockets. They've got an agent finder, so that might be a good way. Because they can tell you what's relevant to your market for updates that will help the rentability.
Yeah.
Chris can help figure out the financial side of, does it make sense to take money out and do a HELOC? Does that cover does the mortgage cover the rent and the mortgage and the HELOC? Or are you feeding it? Are you okay with the payments on the new place? It's a multifaceted thing. So you got to look at, what are you buying now as a replacement house? Can you qualify for that? How quickly can you get your thing leased up? And does all of that make sense? So even if you're not ready for now, talking to Chris and chat with me, and I'll help you find a realtor out there who can help you navigate this stuff. Then even if it takes you 6 months or a year, you have a structured plan in place, and you're not spending money on renovations that don't add rental value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
If you're curious about, getting a HELOC, the short answer is yes. The long answer is yes. And there are lots of different ways to structure it, but I think a HELOC is the easiest money that you will ever get access to. And so I think it's a wonderful tool to at least have in your back pocket, like Melissa said, even if it's going to take you 6 months or a year to actually use it for anything. It's a really important thing to have available to you. So
Okay. Great.
Mike.
I was gonna make a couple comments on HELOCs. I love HELOCs. I'm Mr. HELOC. There's a couple kinds. One is, okay, you have X amount of equity. They give you 80% of that or 50%. It depends on the lending institution. Credit unions are really good. But generally speaking, you get your best deal from your current mortgage company. But so in the HELOC, the fixed HELOC, like, okay, I'm gonna take 50 out and then I'm gonna pay a monthly payment. That's one kind. What I like is the HELOC was just a line of credit. On my personal property, I have 150K line of credit. It's a HELOC, but if I don't use it, it doesn't cost me anything. It's one of the lowest interest rates around, and you can use it for, like back when we were talking about, oh, you need a reserve for repairs and roof. I don't have any reserves for anything, because if one of my I had a roof damage, insurance covered some of it during the ice storm, I'm going to do more work at the time. I just write checks out of my HELOC. So HELOCs are great. The interest rate is great. Work with your lending institution, and you can use it to parlay into other things and deals and stuff, depending on how much equity you have and how big your HELOC can be.
Yeah.
Just do it while you still live there. If you move out, they will loan less to you.
Yes. And yeah, our first house, which we bought in 2006, we got it appreciated quite a bit. We got a HELOC on it. I used the money from that. I've used it to buy 3 homes since. So it's
Wow.
Yeah, not all at once, but
as for the down payments.
yes, starting that for renovations on our current house and for helping me purchase 3 other ones. So yeah. Yeah, it's a good tool. Any other questions? Rob, you're the only other one who's on camera at the moment, so I don't want to pick on you, but you're looking pensive.
No, I'm just, it's interesting to listen to what all of you guys have shared here. I haven't bought investment properties in a while, and I got out of it because of the crazy landlord tenant laws.
Yeah.
So, but I'm definitely contemplating doing it again. And it was just really kind of interesting to be reminded of some of these different tools that are necessary. So,
Yep, great.
I hear that same objection from a lot of clients, Rob. The landlord tenant laws here are scary for people. One of the great things that you can do to hedge against that, if short-term rentals make sense and the permitting is allowed in your jurisdiction, chat with Chris about that in Eugene. He has experience down in Eugene. I have experience up at the Portland metro area, because landlord tenant law doesn't apply on anything under 30 days. And a lot of other people are pivoting to what we used to call corporate housing back in the day, but now the new fun buzzword is midterm housing. There is no distinction in landlord tenant law against midterm or a regular long-term tenant. Anything over 30 days is a long-term tenant for the state, but a midterm tenant might be coming in to work at the hospital, might be doing a summer internship at one of the local companies. I've had Nike interns, I've had Intel interns, I've got lots of travel nurses because they live by a hospital. They're coming from out of state. They don't get caught up in all this stuff, and they stay for 3 to 6 months and they go back to their next job. So
And they pay you handsomely to do that.
if you want to dip your toe back in it, that might be a good way.
my inclination is to go with one of the more reputable, bigger property management companies and just stay hands off. Being a contractor, I have some advantages. So as far as maintenance and repairs and things like that. So I won't get bulldozed like I did once in Sacramento. But I do have something to share as far as an experience with a tenant. I was listening to Mike and his air conditioning thing. I had an elderly couple that rented a house in Coquille over near the coast, and they were the perfect tenant. They told me whenever anything was wrong, they paid the rent on time, every time. They were absolutely the perfect tenant. And one day I went to collect the rent from them, and they said, Rob, I hate to tell you, but we need to leave. We need to move. And I'm like, I was heartbroken. I said, why? And they said, the house is haunted. I said, I beg your pardon? He says, no, we see ghosts at the bottom of the stairs each night. And I said, no, you're kidding, right? He said, no, it is haunted. We need to move from this house. My wife is terrified to sleep at night. So I don't know how you overcome that one, but
I mean, Ghostbusters.
I want to meet your ghost.
Yeah. Did the ghost help you pick the next tenant or what?
I sold the house.
Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't put that in the disclosures, did you?
Hey,
Yeah,
no.
hey, that's disclosure.
There wasn't a
It's not
space for it.
required.
So,
You don't have to disclose that in Oregon, not if somebody passed away in the house.
Mm. Yeah, I was worried that's where you were going with the story. I'm thankful that the house was just haunted.
yeah. Yeah, no, they were great tenants. I wish I had another opening for them, but
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
And they're rare, that perfect a tenant.
yeah. Well, and last call for any other questions. Thank you especially to Nick and to Alex and the ones who are on different time zones. But thank you all for coming. Like Melissa said, she's going to post the recording and send a link out probably tomorrow afternoon. And we're always happy to answer questions, whether it has to do with, any of the financing issues that came up tonight, whether it has to do with finding your next property. We want to be the ones that you call for inquiries, for help, for just wanting to bounce an idea off of. We're happy to be that resource for you. And the next session will be probably another 2 months from now, and we'll be diving a little bit more deeply into how to scale your portfolio, going from your first property to many properties, and the tools and tricks and mindset you need to have to make that jump. So that you have to look forward to. We'll dive into even more detail. But we want to keep conversing with everybody here in the meantime. We don't want to be strangers for the next 2 months, so we'll follow up, and please reach out when you have questions, and we're excited to have you here.
Cool. Thanks, guys. This is
Awesome.